Chapter 83, The Resolution, Hanyu's POV. When Lord Julia told Esau that he was free to move around the rooms without help, Hanyu didn't know which of them was most excited. Esau's face lit up and he smiled at the god in a way Hanyu hadn't seen him do since... had it really been since the temple? Lord Julia smiled back and patted the bed next to his hand, which was a strange gesture. Why not just touch him? She certainly touched him all over the place twice a day when she ordered Hanyu away and changed all his bandages. In any event, the two of them were clearly pleased. Hanyu, however, thought he might cry from relief. Finally! The last few days had been some of the strangest he'd ever lived through. Esau had been quiet, staring down at the bedsheets or at the paper flowers Thad had given him. He'd seemed to retract into himself, reminding Hanyu of a crab withdrawing into its shell. It was a new, strange mood, and Hanyu wasn't sure how to approach him in it. Antony was behaving just as strangely. He sulked into the bedroom to get clothes and comb his hair like a thief, trying to sneak past when Hanyu and Esau were sleeping and making gruff apologies if they happened to wake up and see him there. He slept a great deal, which Lord Julia said was likely the reason he'd healed so fast, but he always slept on the couch. When Hanyu asked him about it, he always whispered that he was worried about Esau's injuries and didn't want to make the man uncomfortable. Hanyu supposed he ought to be grateful that his master was so considerate, but he missed Antony more each night. He'd stopped startling awake every time he touched Esau in his sleep and felt the warmth of his skin, but that didn't really help. No matter how accustomed he grew to that heat and the breathing, he felt like there was a growing tension in his chest that would never relax until he could curl around a small, chilly, tightly coiled body again. Now that Esau was on the mend, surely Antony would come back. After all, he couldn't sleep on the couch forever. Hanyu spun to shout the happy news to his god, but the sight of the empty couch reminded him that Antony had gone out with Lord Theodora. Funny how quickly he'd gotten used to his master spending all his time on that damn couch. "Thank you for all your generous care, my lord," Esau said softly. Hanyu turned back to see him inching towards the edge of the bed. Lord Julia extended a hand, not taking Esau's, but offering hers. Esau cut a nervous glance in Hanyu's direction. What was that about? "Your master has given you permission to touch me before," Lord Julia said, a gentleness in her gruff voice that Hanyu had never heard her use with anybody but Esau. "It's all right." Gods, had he been looking to Hanyu for permission? Had Esau really meant all that shit about Hanyu being first slave? Did the gods even have first slaves? Hanyu had only heard the title used in books or when the aristocratic priests talked about their families' estates to describe a slave who had earned enough trust and favor to be placed above the others as a kind of overseer. Did any of the gods even have enough attendants to warrant that kind of hierarchy? Lord Theodora, perhaps, but neither she nor Kenta had ever indicated that one of her men was in charge of the others. Antony had certainly never mentioned anything of the sort, and even if two of them were enough to warrant it, surely the god didn't want to put Hanyu above Esau in that way. Still, when he thought back over the last few days, Esau had been more differential than usual, and he hadn't snapped at Hanyu again. Hanyu had assumed that it was just a sort of apology for the things he'd said on his first night, but perhaps... Esau shot him another uneasy glance, but obediently took Lord Julia's hand. The god helped him stand, then eased her body back to give him some space. Esau used that space to drop to his knees. How did he do that so gracefully after several days in bed? Hanyu had even been helping him to the chamber pot. But there he was, drifting into his bow like a petal settling on the ground. It had been a while since Hanyu had had to worry about what an oaf he was compared to Esau. Even back at the temple, it had just been a mild irritant. Now, though... "Your servant could never express sufficient gratitude for all my lord's many kindnesses," Esau said, as he bent at Lord Julia's feet. "Come on, sit up," the god said briskly, crouching down in front of him. "You don't owe me any thanks. If someone's hurt, they deserve to be put back together. Anyhow, you did a lot of the work. You were a model patient. Antony could certainly take lessons from you." Hanyu thought that was a little unfair. Antony had done everything she said. This time. Once Esau was sitting up, Lord Julia turned slightly to include Hanyu in her next words. I'll be back once a day, and I still don't want you feeding Antony for a while, but you're well on your way to a full recovery. I still want you to keep an eye on both of them, Hanyu, but I'd say the crisis has passed. Yes, it had. Everyone was getting well again, and Antony would surely come back to bed and stop acting like an uninvited guest in his own rooms. Everything was going to get better, starting now. Hanyu saw Lord Julia off, then came back to find Esau sagging against the bed. When he entered the room, his friend grinned up at him, looking almost like his old self. Finally, Esau exhaled. I was afraid I'd be stuck in that bed until Lord Antony got sick of me and threw me out. Hanyu's mood darkened a little. Why did Esau keep talking that way? Hanyu extended a hand to his friend, much as Lord Julia had done. He wouldn't do that. Now come on, do you want to get out of those bedclothes? Esau groaned. More than anything. That was understandable. Lord Julia helped him wash up and get into clean bedclothes every morning, and Hanyu fixed his hair, but he must still have been feeling unkempt these last few days. Esau had always taken pride in his appearance, and he loved pretty clothes as much as Hanyu did. I'll go get some of your things, Hanyu offered. What would you like? Maybe the pink robe? Esau asked hesitantly, casting another uncertain glance at Hanyu. Of course! Hanyu practically skipped away to retrieve the requested item. When he came back, Esau was sitting on the edge of the bed and fumbling with the ties on his bedclothes. His broken finger, and the tight splint Lord Julia had made to bind it to his other fingers, seemed to be impeding his efforts. Hanyu dropped the robe beside him and reached out to help. Here, let me, he said, and Esau stiffened, but didn't resist. The resistance came when Hanyu tried to help him take the bedclothes off. I can do it, snapped Esau. I'm not totally useless. Hanyu flinched back. I never said you were, but your hand. It's fine, Esau ground out. Then he closed his eyes and drew in a few soft breaths before speaking again, his voice softer. I can manage, but thank you for the offer, truly. He did manage, after a fashion. When he tottered out to join Hanyu in the sitting room, the robe was rumpled and the sash askew, but even so, there was no denying that he dressed himself. So, what do you want to do? Hanyu asked. There used to be so many possible answers to that question. They used to find some of the others or walk in the garden or play with each other's hair and makeup or go to the library and pick out somber holy books for Hanyu to read in silly voices, while Esau accused him of irreverence between helpless giggles. I used to give Antony a loud, squawking voice like a goose, the look you'd give me if I used it in front of him now. Hanyu supposed that most of those activities were still options, technically. If Esau said, let's give each other awful hairdos, then he might actually die of grateful relief. Tears sprang to his eyes as he realized how badly he wanted the two of them to do something normal, to be together again the way they used to. Instead, Esau limped to the doorway and knelt a few feet away, folding his hands demurely in his lap. Our Lord should be back soon, he said. I'd like to be ready to offer a proper greeting. Oh. Fuck. Had Hanyu waited to greet Antony even one time since the first night? He used to drop whatever he was doing to come bow and welcome him home, but he'd always been doing something. It had never occurred to him to just wait. Hanyu spent a few more minutes fiddling with an intricate wooden puzzle he'd found in Antony's writing desk, but finally he gave up and came to kneel beside Esau. How would it look if Antony came back to find one of his attendants respectfully waiting and the other lollygagging on the other side of the room? It would seem like Hanyu cared less, or worse, like he really did think of himself as being above Esau somehow. Imitating Esau was a long-practiced habit. Hanyu didn't even consciously decide to adjust his kneel to mirror his friend. He just found his body doing it. And why not? Even pale and hollow-eyed as he still was, clad in a rumpled and badly tied robe, Esau looked flawless. On him, the disarray seemed intentional, a kind of artful humility. In contrast, Hanyu felt a little garish in his bright red robe and multiple sparkling necklaces. Perhaps he should go change. Before he could, the door opened. Esau folded into his bow, and Hanyu followed suit an instant later, also trailing a beat behind as they both said, Welcome back, my lord. Oh, fuck. Hello. Antony sounded startled, but Hanyu was relieved that there wasn't any pain in his voice. Lord Theodora must have been as careful with him as she'd promised to be. Still, Hanyu was already itching to peek. He knew Antony wouldn't mind. Hell, for a few weeks now, Hanyu had been more likely to greet him with a smile and a wave than with a formal bow, and he'd never objected. But Asao was right there, and Asao was sure to behave perfectly. "I take it Julia has finally released you, Asao?" said Antony, sounding a little surer of himself as the door thudded shut. "Lord Julia has deemed your unworthy servant fit to walk around within these chambers, my lord," Asao confirmed. Antony's chair creaked. "That's wonderful news!" His enthusiasm was no doubt sincere, but the wording seemed a little strange and forced. Hanyu would have expected him to say something along the lines of, "About time," or "I thought your legs would wither off before that tyrant let you stand on them." "I look forward to being able to repay my lord's many kindnesses in some small way," Asao replied, smooth and proper and humble, where Hanyu would probably just have said, "Yes, isn't it?" or something equally inane. "I beg you to make use of me in whatever way pleases you, my lord." There was a short but agonizing moment of silence before Antony spoke. "Raise your heads, will you?" he said at last. "That can't be comfortable without a rug." It wasn't, but Hanyu was mostly just glad to have permission to look at his god again. Antony looked tired and worried, and he was squinting slightly at Hanyu in what seemed to be confusion. Even so, he was lovely enough to steal Hanyu's breath away. As he knelt beside Asao and their lord looked at the two of them, Hanyu realized something. Asao was right. Hanyu needed to be better for their master. He might not want to be first slave or hold any kind of dominion over Asao, but he did want, desperately, for the other thing his friend had said that night to be true. He wanted to be Antony's favorite. Maybe that made him a terrible friend, and maybe it was impossible, but there it was. He had felt so special being Antony's chosen for these last few months, but now his master had another attendant, the best attendant, the attendant he should have had from the beginning. If Hanyu wanted to be sketched and pampered as he had been before, and he did want that, he was going to have to do something he had never really managed before. He was going to have to behave himself.